There was separate gunfire at 3 different restaurants. There was gunfire at a local bar. A suicide bomber detonated himself at a cafe, and a gunman opened fire at a musical venue while a concert was playing. By midnight on Friday, that same day, France had shut down its borders. They had declared a state of emergency, and they had instituted the first mandatory curfew since World War II. The very next day, on Saturday, November 14th, ISIS claimed responsibility, and they stated, quote, to teach France and all nations following in its path that they will remain at the top of the Islamic State list of targets, and that the smell of death won't leave their noses as long as they partake in their Crusader campaign. And then yesterday, on Monday, November 16th, ISIS had made similar attacks against Washington, D.C. At least 129 people have been confirmed dead. At least 350 have been wounded, although we do not have exact numbers yet. All bombs were carried out by the suicide bombers using explosive vests. Reports say that 7 attackers were killed and 6 died as a result of suicide bombings, although we don't know exactly how many attackers there were. That day, France had deployed 3,000 troops to restore order. Now, the issue for us here is not whether we condemn terrorism. We all condemn terrorism, and we condemn it regardless of who the perpetrators are or who the victims are. We've been condemning terrorism since 9/11, and we continue to condemn terrorism every time an attack takes place. The question is, should we still have to condemn terrorism every time it takes place? Should we have to apologize for and condemn a crime that was committed by somebody else simply because that person shares our faith? And that's the question that we're here to answer today. Other groups are not necessarily held to this standard. Anders Breivik, the Norway shooter, who killed 69 Muslim youth at a youth camp. He is a devout Christian, and his writings make numerous allusions to Christianity, and yet Christians were not held accountable. Dylan Roof, the Charleston, South Carolina shooter, who killed 9 people at a predominantly black church. Same thing, Christians were not held accountable for the actions of a single person. So why is it that Muslims are held accountable, and how should we respond? I'm fortunate to have 3 wonderful speakers with us today. Edina Lekovic, she's a public affairs consultant with MPAC, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and she is based out on the West Coast. We have Rizwan Jaka, the chairman of ADAMS in Northern Virginia. ADAMS is one of the largest networks of masajid in the country. And Shahed Amanullah, he's the founder of the website altmuslim, LaunchPosse, and he's the co-founder of Affinis Lab, and he's also a social entrepreneur. I want to thank all of you for coming on today. It's our pleasure to have you here. Edina, I was going to start with you. Can you hear me? Is your audio working? We seem to be having technical difficulties all around. No, we still cannot hear you. Okay. Tell you what, we have some IT people trying to take care of this. In the meantime, I will go to Brother Shahed Amanullah, who joins us from Northern Virginia. So, Brother Shahed, you're very familiar with what's been happening. You're on top of global affairs. What's your opinion on this matter?
Well, it's to start with that question is problematic at best, because you are stepping into a framework that we've stepped into continuously since the days of 9/11. And we have to, if we're going to respond to this situation as humans, everyone, we need to understand the framework that we put in and not allow ourselves to fall into that same trap over and over again. When people ask us these kinds of questions, they implicitly are trying to put us in a place where we are separate from society. Because and a lot of well-meaning people, because they still haven't internalized the fact that Muslims are part and parcel of humanity and of the societies in which they live. So the first thing we need to understand is that we're in that point, and we can't play by the rules of that point. So what do I mean by that? The good news is that we're being put in front of the cameras, and we're being put in front of the press to say something. We have to take advantage of the situation and understand who are the audiences that we're talking to. So we are no longer able to speak to one audience at a time anymore. We speak to every audience at the same time. So that means people that like us, people that hate us, other people in the media, government people that do policy, all of these different audiences. And everything you say needs to resonate with all of these different audiences. Okay? So we understand the framework that we're in. We're trying to break out of that. We're trying to put ourselves back into a framework where we're just like everybody else. The second thing is understanding all these different audiences, that each of them is going to have a reaction to what we say, and everything we say needs to resonate with that. The third thing is that what reaction are we trying to evoke from people? And there's a couple of different things that we usually do. Containment. So we try to like get everybody to calm down. You know, it's not a whole lot of people, it's a tiny fraction of people. With these same lines that you hear over and over again. We try to deflect the attention from us, right? Because all the eyes are on us, and so we try to say, don't look at us, look at them, right? It's a natural reaction, but it doesn't solve the problem. As a matter of fact, it puts us right back into that original framework. The reaction that we need to try to evoke in people is unity. And there's a couple of good examples of how this can be done. For those people who remember the Boston bombings, there was one particular actor in that whole theater was the uncle of the two bombers, or one of the two bombers. They called him Uncle Rizwan. And he gave a very short interview, and you could see visible rage in his. If there's one time where Muslim rage is allowed, it's now. He gave such an impassioned reaction, and it was a very human reaction. You know, if I get my hands on them, I'm going to. It was something like along the lines of that. It was so popular among average Americans that they turned him into an internet meme. He became their hero, Uncle Rizwan the hero. So in that reaction from people, and in that statement from Uncle Rizwan, you saw something that works. Okay, what it did is that it got other Americans to say he's on our side, and people who are like him are on our side. Even if he's Muslim, he's part of us. And so this is part of understanding the psyche of people who are listening. They're afraid. They're scared for their safety. And if we are truly, we say this in talking points, by the way. We say no one should be more angry than us, but we say it so academically that people don't see it in our faces. If we truly are angry that they're doing this in our name, they need to see it. We need to be pissed off on camera, just like anyone else would be, and show that just viscerally affects us. Not that we're just reading talking points off a piece of paper. It has to be organic. It has to be part. There has to be, genuine emotion. Right? And so, I mean, and this takes somebody who's comfortable enough to show that emotion. We all feel that emotion. We're all pissed off. We're all angry, but we contain ourselves sometimes because we want to show kind of this front of having everything together. You know something? Sometimes it's okay to lose it. This is one of those times.
So you heard Brother Shahed's comments, and so here we are again. It seems every time a terrorist attack occurs, we go through the same song and dance. Muslims are asked to condemn terrorism. We condemn it, and at the end of the day, it may not always be enough. So what's your take on it?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, in the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful. These days I'm saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim every 5 minutes to reset my intention because of everything that's going on. So having said that, I agree with everything that we certainly have to stand firmly for justice, even when it's against our own selves. That's what the Quran says, and that's what we are held to. And that's what Allah sets out for us. So these days, even though we don't want to and don't feel that we should have to condemn acts of terrorism, it is our responsibility before God to prove to the world and to use every platform available, especially when ISIS's platforms are much larger and much more far-reaching and much more piercing than ours are. When ISIS the language of violence, we have to use our voices of peace, of coexistence, in every available channel that we have, whether it's social media, whether it's face-to-face with our neighbors and our coworkers, whether it's within our masajid or beyond them, in every available means that we have to us. And that goes back to not just our being American, but it goes back to our Islamic values. It goes right back to Prophet Muhammad, who we know was always able to speak in their own language. And that doesn't mean that he, spoke to different languages, we know he was an illiterate man. It means just exactly what Shahed said, which is that he was able to know his audience and to adjust his message to the audience in front of him in an effort to serve God. And that's exactly what we need today. Is our outrage, our anguish, our confusion are all very real and they're very understandable. And yet we have to lead with outrage against ISIS, not against the media, not against politicians. We first have to start with our outrage at the actions of violent criminals who are defacing our religion and dragging it through the mud. And people need to see and feel and hear that rage as being sincerely from our Islamic standpoint. And that is critical, again, going back to what Shahed said, because of who our audience is. We need to remember that more than 70% of our fellow Americans do not know a Muslim firsthand. They do not know a Muslim firsthand. That's almost 3/4 of Americans who say that they do not know a Muslim firsthand. So we cannot blame them if they do not know us, and if they do not know where we stand. And when ISIS's speakers and actions are speaking across the world through violence, we cannot blame them for not knowing the difference and for feeling very obvious feelings of fear, especially when so many of us are probably also feeling fear. It is critical that we have an emotional reaction and that we share with people our outrage against ISIS, and that we say clearly as Muslims that we hate ISIS. And that it is important that we should also stress that ISIS's #1 victims are Muslims. But if people do not hear it from us, who else do we expect them to hear it from and take it with credibility? I think it's also important that we label ISIS's actions as crimes against humanity. If we are to take the Quranic verse about if you were to slay one person, it is as if you have slayed all of humanity, and if you were to save one life, it is as if you have saved the lives of all of humanity seriously, then we should consider ISIS's actions as genocidal, because their actions of taking multiple lives are the scale of their violence and of their atrocities are a crime against all of us. The other thing that I want to mention is that we have to. Our condemnations, again, we shouldn't have to condemn anything, but we do have truth wherever we have opportunities to. And as Allah tells us in the Quran, we should repel evil with what is better until those who are declared enemies become like our close friends. Allah tells us that that is possible. He also tells us that surely with hardship comes ease. We know all of these things and we remind ourselves of them, and yet it is critical that in moments like this that we put them into action and that we not be afraid to speak firmly for the truth of our faith. Because if people don't hear it from us, how else do we expect that they will know the truth of Islam as compared to the lies of Islam that ISIS is perpetrating? And I'll stop there, hoping that you have heard me. What is better until...
We heard you. We heard you.
Edina, yes, we heard you. Edina, so let me follow up with a question then. Are we, if we continue to follow this path though, are we encouraging people to continue to paint us with a broad brush? Everything you said makes sense, and I certainly see your point, but if we continue to follow this logic, right, people are going to continue to expect us to apologize. People are going to continue to expect us to condemn it with the implication that unless we condemn it, we somehow approve of what's going on. Whereas any other group, people are assumed that of course they condemn murder, of course they condemn terrorism, and it's implied. But for Muslims, it's always the opposite. It's implied that we approve of terrorism unless we condemn it, and unless we put our foot down at some point and say, hey, I'm not going to apologize for the crimes of others. We need to get beyond this double standard. Then they will continue to maintain this double standard. And in addition, we have terrorist attacks in other parts of the world, in Yemen, in Beirut, in Iraq, Afghanistan, what's going on in Burma. So how does all that fit into it?
not talking about apologizing for anything. There is a difference between condemning and apologizing. When we condemn, we make clear what is right from what is wrong. And we make clear what Islam says is acceptable versus what Islam says is unacceptable. And that is not just an opportunity, it's a responsibility that we have as Muslims, no matter who the perpetrator is. And again, I go back to the verse of stand firmly for justice, even if it is against your own self. We do not want to be in this position, and yet it is necessary that we speak out. So there is no reason to apologize, and we should push back when anybody asks us to apologize. But we should be very clear and unequivocal in condemning actions that are un-Islamic and that are a violation of core Islamic teaching. That also gives us the opportunity to talk about how ISIS's actions are impacting people all around the world, and that Paris is just the latest act of massive violence committed at the hands of ISIS that we have been seeing just escalate further and further in the past few years. And that ISIS, again, needs to be wiped from the face of the earth. This first week of reaction is not a time of making policy recommendations. It is not a time to, and we are seeing we're seeing France and other world actors now already launching additional military strikes. We should not, I believe, fall into the trap of making policy recommendations at this time. It is a time of immense emotionalism, and we need to first deal with the emotions. We need to treat the emotions before we can treat the issues that are bigger than that. So I hope that answers your question. And this, again, talking about Beirut, talking about the Russian airliner that was bombed by ISIS, and ISIS's actions in Iraq and Syria and beyond, all of these things are critical in the conversation. But first, in order for that part of the conversation to be heard, we must first start with the condemnation, because if you don't do that, then your audience is left to assume that, or left to question, right? And you want to wipe away the question so that they can hear you as you are talking about the broader issues that are involved here, and that you can broaden their understanding. As you are talking about the broader issues that are involved here, and that you can broaden their understanding.
Jazakallah. Thank you very much, sister. We have Brother Rizwan Jaka, chairman of the Adam Center. He was able to resolve his technical difficulties. So, Rizwan. I turn it over to you now. Should Muslims have to condemn?
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Hazem. Thanks so much, and thank you to Brother Shahed. Brother Hazem, thank you so much. Thank you to Brother and thank you to Brother Shahed and Sister Edina. But just so you know, there's a lot of echo and feedback on the system, so there may be a delay between your question and response. But again, thank you so much for hosting this very important conversation. Can you hear me, Brother Hazem, just to make sure? Okay. Okay, excellent. So thank you again for having us. I do not have headphones, so I'm speaking through the air here. But if you can hear me, as Sister Edina had said, first of all, we clearly condemn terrorism and violent extremism by principle, by the Islamic principle, and that is our faith principle. Obviously, people that we work with, on a daily basis. Across general society, they know that. And when there is a very horrific attack like what has happened in Paris, recently, it's something that the question does come up all the time. And it's something that I think that we have to go beyond just written statements of condemnation, and I think our community has, the Muslim community has, working with law enforcement around the country for national security. We have been working at the Adam Center for 14 years with FBI and local law enforcement, and recently Department of Homeland Security since their inception to work for national security. So it's something that it's not something that even when just a horrific attack occurs, that we are stepping up for national security and letting people know our principles of protection of life, and that we denounce these horrific attacks. Now, it's something that, people think, are we apologizing? Absolutely, we're not apologizing, because we didn't do anything as the Muslim community. It is extremists and fanatics that are doing this for political reasons, and they wrap it in the enigma of, they think it's for faith. Obviously, it is not. But we have to clear up the misconceptions. That is our responsibility, to let people know, educate people. And if we educate them through statements, if we educate them through seminars, through interfaith activities, open houses, that is what we should be doing, is educating people on the misconceptions they might have, and also reaffirm the Islamic principles. We can keep, of course, a general statement on our website. But when there is a horrific attack, people ask the questions. They don't necessarily go to the website to look at. They want to know what you think through social media, through press releases, through media interviews, and through one-on-one discussions. So we must be in the forefront. If we are not at the table, others will speak for us. So absolutely, we must speak the truth. And the truth is, obviously, we condemn terrorism and violent extremism, but we must do more than that. We must be in active participants and partners in national security, and making sure that we are countering radicalization. We have created think tanks in our community called Muflihun, that is a counter-radicalization think tank that works on de-radicalization and countering the radical ideology. We have One True Islam that has also been created to help people reaffirm the Islamic principles of life, and also work to counter any radicalization messages on the internet. So we must do a lot of different activities for true, sincere national security, and letting the general society understand who we truly are. And finally, one example that we need to understand, like, for example, if someone in your, let's say you have a business or a nonprofit organization, if an employee did something wrong, if, let's say, they robbed a bank, the business would say that employee does not reflect the ideals of my company. You would immediately send out a statement to let people know that. And so if a extremist that claims to be Muslim does something, in a twisted manner in the name of Islam, we as Muslims also want to distance ourselves from those terrorists. And so we have a responsibility to speak the truth. And it is something that it is a reminder for us all that we must keep in mind, in addition to the horrific attacks in Paris and the victims of the Paris attack, we must keep in mind and remember the horrific attacks in Beirut and Turkey, and even the Russian airliner, depending on the investigation and what happened. Obviously, any horrific attack happens. Now, one other thing to keep in mind contextually, in the past 18 months, there have been 78 school shootings. All of them have been done by non-Muslims. So we have to contextualize that, in the US, about 4% of terrorist activities are done by people that claim to be Muslim. 96% are done by non-Muslims. In Europe, 98% of terrorist attacks are done by non-Muslims and 2% by people that claim to be Muslim. So we also have a responsibility to educate people, that to put everything in context, that of course one terrorist attack is one too many, but people have to understand the spectrum of terrorism and violence. 190,000 murders in the US by non-Muslims. And so we have to put it into context. So our statements should reflect that, yes, we condemn terrorism, but let's understand that terrorism internationally is, 2 to 4% done by people who claim to be Muslim. And so we also have to remind people to not stereotype and vilify Muslims. And I want to be very clear that, the Christian community, the Jewish community have stood up left and right to protect Muslims, and they stand up, they offer their support, and they always are there to defend Muslims against any stereotyping, against any backlash. Law enforcement is standing ready to protect our community against hate crimes, and so that is something that we have to remember, that the voices of reason, vast majority outnumber the voices of fringe extremism that try to blame the
So let's see,
community.
we have some,
and the final thing,
questions coming in from the audience. So I thought I would take a few questions and field them to our presenters. How can we take a more preventative measure or proactive measure rather than taking a reactive stance? It seems like apologizing after an attack takes place. What can we do to do something before the attacks happen? Sister Edina?
So this is Rizwan. I can start. Basically, of course, that's something that we should, as Muslim community members, individuals, we should always be engaged in society on a daily, regular basis. If you're a part of your child goes to school, be a part of the PTA, get involved in interfaith work, make sure that you're in touch with media entities and working with them to understand the Muslim community on a day-to-day basis. At Adams, we have Boy Scouts of America and Girl Scouts of America. And we invite the media to those activities so that they see that we are patriotic Americans, we love our country, and we stand for the same principles as everyone else.
I would agree with that, and I would add that this is one of those areas where every single person, every Muslim has a role to play. If you have non-Muslim friends who are genuinely your friend circle, if you are showing other people care about them, not because you're trying to get something, but because you just care, how you build social capital. The people ask, for example, why do people care so much about French lives versus Lebanese lives or other lives? Because the audience that's listening to them, the French have built social capital with them through their cultural products, through history, right? And that's, whereas these other groups of people have not. And so by building that social capital, it's a one at a time thing, each person, that's how you build up that resilience. If you look at communities in America, for example, where Muslims are very well integrated into their society, that society doesn't tolerate anti-Muslim anything, right? But societies where Muslims are segregated and isolated, then it allows those things to happen. So it's a lesson for all of us to learn.
Thank you, Shahed. What can we do as a preventative measure on this? Do you have anything you can add to that?
I think, in addition to what's already been said, that we certainly need to branch out. Again, people will, when you think about, the quote that comes to my mind is the Maya Angelou's quote about people will forget what you said, and they will always remember how you made them feel. And in moments of crisis and tragedy, these are the things that come to the forefront and that we have to keep in mind. So when we're thinking about prevention, going out and branching out and coming out of the closet as a Muslim, whether it's to your coworkers or your neighbors or your, at whatever circles you're a part of, and becoming more civically engaged so that Muslims in your community are known for who they are, the vital contributing citizens that we are in our local neighborhoods, in our PTAs, in our city councils, in environmental groups, in human rights groups, you name it. That's the best proactive measure that we can take so that we are known for who we are and what our contributions are. We're just everyday citizens, rather than who are Muslim only when bad news happens. If we are fully integrated within society and contributed on a daily basis, like most of us are, but doing so more publicly and in larger numbers, then our community will be known more fully for who we are and the values that we stand for. But if the only times that people go, oh, wait, who are Muslims? And what do they stand for is in the aftermath of tragedy, then certainly we are setting ourselves up for more problems. In terms of prevention too, I would mention one more thing, which is the critical importance of supporting our youth right now. This is a confusing time for all of us and our families and our communities, but for Muslim youth who go to public schools and who are on college campuses and who are, struggling with their own identities and being faced with horrific questions about, well, how do I know that you're not ISIS? And, if this is what your people are up to and this is what your text says, and they are not equipped with the religious literacy to be able, and the emotional maturity to be able to handle those questions effectively and with compassion, that's really one of the places that I worry about the most. And so creating safe spaces within our mosques, community centers, youth groups, you name it, where we have open conversations about this tragedy and about and creating a space where we can deal with the emotional health of our communities, bringing in therapists, counselors, social workers that we have within our communities to help to deal with the emotional state of our, especially our youth, but all of us, because it's a double tragedy, just like 9/11 was, where one, we feel attacked as people, and secondly, we feel doubly attacked as Muslims. So having the spaces where people can talk about that openly, I think, is critical. Lastly, I'll point to prevention programs like that of MPAC, which is called, ironically, the Safe Spaces Initiative, which is about creating physically safe spaces and also spiritual safe spaces where we can have more open conversations that are focused on prevention, where within our mosques we can talk more openly about politics, about social issues, about the broad range of things that affect our daily lives, and where we can have open and candid conversation about those things that are healthy, that is critical, and that where families, where imams, where people in the community might be concerned about marginalized individuals who they feel might be struggling with mental health issues or other kinds of challenges. We need more resources within that regard, and that's not just to prevent terrorism, because as was mentioned, terrorism is not the main issue going on in our community or in our country. Less than 5% of domestic terror plots and international terror plots are committed by people who claim to be Muslim. So that's not the largest problems that we have, but there are other social alienation type problems that exist within all of our communities, and mental health is certainly an issue that exists within our communities. So how can we be proactive? Let's give especially our kids, our young people, the tools to be able to talk openly and candidly about their feelings in situations like this, and also give them the tools to be able to talk effectively about Islam, especially in moments where there are hard questions like we are facing today.
Jazakallah. Thank you so much for that, Sister Edina. Brother Rizwan, I'll take it back to you for just a moment. I know that you've been working with a group of pastors who are doing their best to improve the image of Muslims among their congregations. I remember that you've told me that these types of condemnations coming from Muslims and Muslim organizations have a big impact on their effectiveness. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Thank you for the question. And so yes, I mean, our interfaith partners and evangelical Christian partners and Jewish partners and many people of other faiths, they actually appreciate our forthcoming in condemning terrorism and violent extremism. Use the statements and actually send them to people that do not believe that Muslims condemn terrorism and violent extremism, or that have mistrust of Muslims. So actually they actually circulate them to people that have different opinions. And so it's something that is helpful to them so that they can let people know and understand who the Muslim community truly is. And there is a large population of Americans that still have mistrust chaos and misunderstanding. And we truly appreciate, Christian and Jewish partners in that regards. It's important that, through social media, that we include our interfaith partners so that they can retweet the messages out to their colleagues. And then, that's one way, of course, to, remove the mistrust. And so definitely we, like I said, there are so many Christian and Jewish and Sikh and Hindu partners and Buddhist partners that advocate for the common good. And I do want to also say that when there is a situation like when Pastor Terry Jones was burning the Quran or planning to burn the Quran, Christian groups stood up and said, not in our name. They actually condemned that act, and they went even beyond that. Christian groups bought Qurans and they distributed Qurans. They said, look, if this one Christian extremist is going to allegedly burn a Quran, we're going to respond by giving Qurans out. Christians did that. And the National Shoulder-to-Shoulder Interfaith Coalition, representing National Council of Churches, Union for Reform Judaism, and 20 faith groups, including Baptists, Catholics, Evangelical Lutherans, they were formed as a response to anti-Muslim bigotry. So I want to make sure it's very clear that the other faith groups stand up against bigotry and against intolerance, and they have stood up with their action, with their support, and they respond in such an amazing manner, and we're blessed to have their wonderful partnership. And we stand up for the rights of minorities in Muslim majority countries, and we have helped rebuild churches in Pakistan. We've helped counter bigotry of minorities and Christians in Muslim majority countries. So we must stand up for just around the world together with our fellow brothers and sisters in Christian and Jewish communities. And we stand.
Thank you, Brother Shahed. I'll actually build on what Brother Rizwan said and turn to you. Brother Rizwan, if you could mute your speakers, please. Brother Shahed, the condemnations that come from the Muslim community, both on an individual level and institutions like ISNA and MPAC and so on, we've been doing that ever since 9/11. And we continue to do it every time there is a terrorist attack. So let me play devil's advocate here. If these condemnations are what people need to hear, so that they know that Muslims are firmly against terrorism, and if this is what our interfaith partners need to help convince their fellow congregations that Muslims are sincere, well, we've been doing it ever since 9/11, and it hasn't worked, right? And the public opinion of Muslims has gradually gotten worse over the last 13, 14 years. So do we need a new strategy?
No, you bring up a very good point, and I think we all need to take a step back and be very sober about this. All of the wonderful talking points that have come out today are true, and they have been put out there. But this is not a logical battle we're fighting. This is an emotional battle we're fighting. And so, for example, when we say, but Islamist violence is only a tiny bit of the violence out there, it's perceived by our audiences as deflection. Okay? When we say, oh, we're worried about backlash, it's seen as self-serving. Okay? This is, again, we may be right. We may be logically correct, but we're not understanding the emotional state of our audience. And if we are trying to bring them to our side, then we need to respect that. You cannot defeat fear without respecting it first, okay? And we've been doing this as a cycle now for 15 years, and people keep asking it, so it's time to change the strategy, okay? So when we speak from a position of confidence. You know something? There are bad things happening to Muslims in the West all the time. I don't discount any of that. But compare what we're going through to Muslims in the rest of the world. We actually are quite privileged. It's time we actually stand with some dignity. And then say, something, we have all the rest of the time to talk about bad things that are happening to us. Today, we are united and we're talking about what's happening to them. If people start distracting you by saying, well, is ISIS Islamic or not, or can they call them Muslim? They try to get you into these these frameworks that they've chosen for you. So we have to say, I don't care if they say they're Muslim or not. I want to defeat them, just like you do. You know, if people say, why aren't you protesting? We'll say, do you think ISIS gives a damn if we protest? That's just to make you feel good. I'm not interested in making you feel good. I'm interested in defeating them. So if you want to have a conversation about defeating them, let's unite and have a discussion about defeating them. Bring the focus so that us includes all of us and them includes ISIS, not Muslims versus everyone else. Anytime you smell that framework, break it.
Wonderful, thank you. Edina, let me turn back to you, despite the fact that you have a sleeping baby. So we will do our best not to wake up the child. You know, a lot of this appears to me to be a public relations issue. A lot of it appears to be a media battle, and so often the media does not seem cooperative or even fair as far as this issue is concerned. Muslims do their best to present a positive argument within the media, but we just seem to get drowned out by all the negativity. So what can we do as a community to get better at representing ourselves?
The media in the same way that we think about Muslims, in the sense that there is no such thing as the media. There is no such thing as the Muslims, right? There are a variety of different media outlets that exist around the world and within each of our cities and within each of our communities. And it is just as much as it is a challenge for us to get our messages out, media can be an ally or it can be an adversary in that process. But just like we talked about prevention with regard, earlier, with media, one of the best cases of prevention is to create those relationships with reporters before a crisis, so that they know our communities for what they are, and they've been there covering other stories before they have to show up and get our reaction to a crisis or a tragedy. So if folks are on this webinar and don't have existing relationships, that's an action item in addition to building interfaith relationships, that we need to build those relationships and those alliances early on for purposes that are not defensive, but that are proactive and about relationship building and community building and building our own amplification system. Secondly, with regard to media, we have the greatest opportunities than we've ever had before. Almost 15 years ago now, when 9/11 happened, I want to remind folks who were not there that the ways that American Muslim organizations got their condemnation statements out was through fax machines. The five or six leaders of major American Muslim organizations were in Washington, D.C. that very morning, supposed to meet with President Bush. And after the attacks happened, they had a press conference within a few hours, and then I remember being in front of a fax machine sending out our statements. Alhamdulillah, 14, 15 years later, we now have amazing tools at our disposal with the internet, with social media, and with new media platforms. Rather than getting angry that CNN and MSNBC and Fox News are not getting it right, we should remember that their collective audience is under 3 million people on your average night. So this is not the way to get the wide mass audience that it used to be. Instead, we have a variety of channels available to us, everything from the Huffington Post to altmuslim to so many different media platforms that exist out there where we can be submitting op-eds and blogs and speaking in our own voices. This is one of the main complaints that I've heard from Muslims for the past decade, is people are talking about us but not to us, and that is a very legitimate complaint and one that I share. However, we have power. Like the American author Alice Walker has been known to, or once said, the most common way that people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. Today, we American Muslims have the greatest power than we have ever had by being able to share our stories on our own terms, both in person and online. So we shouldn't be discouraged by media. It should fuel our ability to amplify our own voices. And it doesn't take much. I mean, we're talking about, 500 words that should be submitted. We also all have the greatest way to bypass media if we want to, which is through social media. If 90% or more of our friends and followers on social media are other Muslims, then we only have ourselves to blame, because we have the ability to tap into our broader real world social networks to be able to amplify our own message and to tell people person to person, here is what Muslims are doing, and here is the agony that we share with you, and here we stand united, all of us together around our common enemy of ISIS. So we have lots of channels where we can amplify our own voices. Secondly, through social media, we have a greater ability to hold media accountable than ever before. So even the fact that on day one, day two, there were these questions around why weren't we paying attention to Beirut, when Beirut happened, and then the next day, why did Paris get all this coverage? Well, that trickled up so that media too starts to cover those stories. So everything we do online has the ability to amplify and broaden out where our voices can be reaching. But I do want to underscore what Shahed said, which is that we cannot ignore the emotion. This is not a time of rational thought. This is a time of emotionalism outside of our community and also within our community. So that's why we need to really pay attention to those emotions on all sides, and to I'm quoting a lot of things today, but the 7 habits of highly effective people. One of the most critical one that goes back to what we also learned from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is seek first to understand and then to be understood. We as Muslims, we fly off the handle pretty frequently when we feel like, why are you blaming me? I didn't do anything. When people need to, just as we need to vent, other people need to vent. And if we can lend an ear before we open our mouth, we are doing a great service that reflects what we were taught by our Prophet, peace be upon him, and by our text.
Jazakallah. Thank you so much for that. Brother Rizwan, as I had mentioned before, you are the chairman of ADAMS, which is a network of masajid in the Northern Virginia area, one of the largest networks of masajid within the United States. And I know that ADAMS is very engaged in interfaith work as well as government relations work. So I want to give the audience a takeaway. I want to give them some action items that they can take back to their masajid, things that they can do. So as Edina said, as Shahed said, we can, on an institutional level and on an individual level, we can start engaging our own communities. So, Brother Rizwan, if you could share some of the more effective practices, some of the best practices that ACT has in terms of engaging the larger community.
No, thank you. I think, yeah, absolutely. We must be, as mentioned, we must be confident. We should never be victims or have any type of victimhood mentality. We are Americans, and we love our country, and we are here to protect our country. We have several thousand American Muslims serving in the U.S. military, defending the freedom, and that is something that people need to know. And what can we do on a daily basis? What we should do is what our faith commands us to do. We should do good deeds. We should do community service activities, helping feed those in need. We have regular programs here that feed the homeless, that go to shelters, to senior citizens' homes, and provide help and service. We have Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, 400 here at ADAMS. They just did scouting for food, helping feed those in need. They serve their country. One of our Boy Scouts collected backpacks for military children of military families. Interfaith dialogue, getting involved in neighborhood interfaith dialogues, coordinating one, inviting neighbors to the home. During Ramadan, our evening school program made gift baskets for their neighbors that simply said, we wanted to share our happiness in this month of Ramadan with our neighbors, and giving them candies and dates and snacks. Getting to working with your law enforcement. Mosques should be getting out there and having quarterly meetings with local law enforcement. Organizations should have meetings with the FBI on a regular basis. We have monthly meetings with the FBI on multiple activities, not just national security is of utmost, but also protecting against hate crimes and working on safer internet practices, working on cyber crimes and so forth. So, working with general society, inviting your neighbors to the mosque, open houses, this on a regular basis should occur. And then obviously folks individually, people should get involved in society, getting involved in, their civic activities in their neighborhoods, clean up activities and cleaning the road. So what we are supposed to do as citizens of this great country, we should be doing on a regular basis. And there's so many activities. Get involved in, the different programs that are, local shelters, American Heart Association, working with, different relief agencies, Habitat for Humanity. There's so many opportunities. Just get involved, and your actions will speak louder than any words or any statements that are necessary. Obviously, we must speak and work for the common good and represent our faith in the best possible manner.
Jazakallah, Brother Rizwan. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. Well, it appears that we are out of time, and unfortunately, we're going to have to bring the webinar to an end. However, even though the webinar is ending, the conversation is not. This is a conversation that we need to take to our families, to our communities, to our local mosques, to our neighbors. This is a serious issue for the community. It will continue to be an issue for many, many years. Hopefully the audience has gotten some guidance and some action items from our very knowledgeable speakers. I want to thank the speakers for taking time out of their day to join ISNA on this webinar. I want to thank all of the attendees for their time. I want to remind everyone that ISNA, we have an event in Cincinnati this coming weekend. I encourage all of you to become members of ISNA so that you can support the work that we do, and we will have future webinars in the future, inshallah. I want to apologize again profusely for the technical difficulties that we were experiencing at the beginning. We had everything set up ahead of time, but it seemed like the moment we started the webinar, everything went wrong, and for that I sincerely apologize. I want to thank all of you for tuning in, and stay tuned for our next webinar, inshallah, which will be coming soon. Again, thank you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.